As the story of appeasement continues, I think it's prudent to go back to Rudyard Kipling and his poem Danegeld, which is about a time when the Vikings, the Danes, were plaguing Anglo-Saxon England with raids and threatening it with conquest. And what the Danes often did at first, before they decided to fully commit to conquering Eastern England, was to extort money out of their victims. Protection money, a la the mafia. In other words, you're paying them to protect you from them. If you pay me, I won't beat you up or kill you or rape your women or burn your homes or steal all your livestock and gear. If you don't pay me, who knows what would happen? So Kipling, in the late 19th century, is thinking about this way of being and about the countries that did it and what the historical result is. And it is very apropos as regards appeasement. Danegeld, Rudyard Kipling, regarding Anglo-Saxon England from 980 to 1016, Anno Domini. It is always a temptation to an armed and agile nation to call upon a neighbor and to say, "We invaded you last night. We are quite prepared to fight, unless you pay us cash to go away." And that is called asking for Danegeld. And the people who ask it explain that you've only to pay them the Danegeld, and then you'll get rid of the Dane. It is always a temptation for a rich and lazy nation to puff and look important and to say, "Though we know we should defeat you, we have not the time to meet you. We will therefore pay you cash to go away." And that is called paying the Danegeld. But we've proved it again and again that if once you have paid him the Danegeld, you will never get rid of the Dane. It is wrong to put temptation in the path of any nation for fear they should succumb and go astray. So when you are requested to pay up or be molested, you will find it better policy to say, "We never pay anyone Danegeld, no matter how trifling the cost. For the end of that game is oppression and shame, and the nation that plays it is lost." Appeasement, giving an aggressor what they want in order for them to go away, in hope that they will go away, is the Danegeld. And we've seen it play out with the aggression of Imperial Japan, Fascist Italy, and the proxy war that ends up being fought in Spain. But we have now come to Germany, which is the appeasement that brings about the greatest calamity in human history thus far, the Second World War. So, we'll look back at Germany after World War I. Despite the Versailles arms limitations, the Germans were not about to play to the spirit of those pettifogging rules. In fact, the Germans intended to get around those rules any which way they could, because they understood that they lived in the middle of the North European plain with aggressive peoples on all sides. And the only way you maintain your independence in a situation like that, just ask the Poles, is to be so strong that your neighbors don't attack you, and to be aggressive and scary enough so that your neighbors don't combine against you, like what happened in the various partitions of Poland. So Versailles mandates that Germany, after the war, the Weimar Republic will have a 100,000-man military, which is basically, in early 20th century terms, a police force. So what the Germans do is they play a little numbers game, and they have people recruited for very, very, very short terms of service, and then they have a secret list of reserves. So a person goes into the military, serves a very short period of time, goes through their training, and then they're on somebody's list of a secret reserve. So in fact, what the Germans do is they bring a lot of people through their army training who then have that army training and who then quietly and unobtrusively and secretly continue their training so that if there was an emergency requiring the army, that Germany would be able to summon up a hell of a lot more than 100,000 men. Now, one of the ways the Germans were able to do this is that General Hans von Seeckt of the German General Staff, the leader of Germany's Reichswehr, or Imperial Army after the war, was able to use his connections among the Bolsheviks in Russia to make a deal. See, both Germany for losing the war and Soviet Russia for being communist are pariah nations to the rest of the world. And so the pariah nations say, hey, we're pariahs. You want to be pariahs together? We can help each other out. And like other times in history, that's exactly what happens. The Germans and the Soviets, because they are disdained by everyone else, come together in the 1920s and the early 1930s and help each other out. The Soviets give the Germans land area to secretly train large forces of men. They exchange technology that's going to lead to armored warfare, tanks, and the theory of how to use them, and so forth. So the Soviets gain valuable technical assistance, and the Germans gain the ability to have more of an army than Versailles wants. Now, one of the things that Versailles has forbidden is for Germany to have any kind of an air force. But what sprang up throughout Germany in the 1920s are a series of glider enthusiast societies. And these glider enthusiasts are young men who, and a few women, who learn how to actually do something that in many ways is more difficult than flying a powered aircraft. They learn to fly a glider. Glider doesn't have any power. Flying a glider is a lot like sailing a sailing vessel rather than using a motorized vessel. Motorized vessels much more straightforward, much more simple. You aim where you go. But a sailing vessel requires you to take into account the wind and maybe to tack against the wind, like I showed you when we were doing the Age of Discovery. Well, flying a glider is similar. You've got to be like an eagle, soaring high in the heavens and trying to catch the thermals and ride the warm air. So to become a good glider pilot requires, to my mind, more skill than to become a good powered aircraft pilot. And why are these glider societies so prevalent and so well funded? Because they're going to form the nucleus of a future Air Force. But it looks like it's purely civilian fun. Now, the various naval arms agreements don't apply at first to Germany in any kind of participatory way. The Germans are forbidden to have battleships of modern kind. They're forbidden to have anything like U-boats, submarines. But as the late 1920s makes it clear, even before Hitler takes power, the Weimar Republic is building warships that skirt the limits of the Washington Naval Treaty. So the British come along, and rather than saying, Germany, naughty, 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 you're violating those agreements, the British come up with the 1935 Anglo-German Naval Agreement, which recognizes that as a great power and as the war is long past, Germany, of course, is going to build heavy warships and submarines and all the other panoply of things that a battle fleet needs to have. So, the Kaiserliche Marine, the Imperial Navy, has become the Kriegsmarine, the war fleet, and Germany is going to be allowed to build warships like anyone else. The British have decided that the way you negotiate with somebody who's violating the limits that were placed on them is to expand the limits so that they will feel comfortable and not aggressively tell you to take your agreement and shred it. In fact, what this leads to is this is a preparation for what will later be called Plan Z, or Plan Z if you are a part of the British world. Plan Z is the plan of German Grand Admiral Erich Raeder to build a war fleet second to none in European waters anyway, a modern fleet that, like the old Imperial Navy, would sweep the British from the waves and from their naval superiority. But unlike in imperial times, Plan Z is 1 year into a 6 or 7 year cycle, and by the time war starts, Hitler promises the Navy he won't go to war until 1944, but in fact he goes to war in 1939. So the war fleet is not at all ready. In fact, had the Germans invested most of the money that they spent in large warships, battleships, battle cruisers, heavy cruisers, an aircraft carrier that never got anywhere, into submarine construction, they might have actually won the war. Scary thought. So the Germans are preparing to get around all of these. In the early 1930s, when Hitler takes power, his answer to the crazy diplomacy of how do we trick those allies is to say to the world, hey, world, here's the Versailles Treaty. What are you going to do? We're building. Germany goes out into the open. The glider societies become the new Luftwaffe. Luftwaffe means Air Force. The Kriegsmarine is exposed. The old Reichswehr, the old Imperial Army, is now the Wehrmacht, the war force. And what's the world going to do about it? Well, what a lot of the don't want to be messy, no messy Nazis, don't want to. What the anti-Nazis hope is that by shredding the Versailles Treaty and its arms limitations, Hitler is going to bring down the wrath of the Versailles powers and be overthrown. Doesn't happen. The rest of the world learns to accommodate Hitler's ambitions. Strike one. We'll see where this goes.